What does real leadership look like? Would you term a dictator a leader? Or would you term those leaders who had the courage to stand up when staying silent was safer? In the shadows of a brutal dictatorship in the Dominican Republic, four sisters redefined what it meant to lead. The Mirabal sisters: Patria, Minerva, Maria, and Didi. These sisters were not born into power, yet they became symbols of resistance, strength, and fearlessness. For context, the Dominican Republic is a part of the Caribbean region in North America. Rafael Trujillo came to power after a coup and a manipulated election in 1931. His rule became one of the most brutal dictatorships in Latin America until he was assassinated in 1961, which led to the collapse of his regime. The Dominican Republic in the mid-1900s was not just a country. It was a controlled silence. Under the rule of Rafael Trujillo, fear was everywhere. His image filled public spaces, his name was spoken carefully, and his power was absolute. People disappeared without explanation, and opposition wasn't debated. It was outright erased. This wasn't just dictatorship, it was domination. But in a quiet rural region, far from the capital's political core, four sisters were growing up in a household that valued education, independence, and courage. They weren't born rebels, they became them.
The awakening. The shift began quietly with Minerva Mirabal. While studying in the city, she saw what others were too afraid to acknowledge. Behind the normal life people pretended to live, there was fear. Students whispered about disappearances. Professors avoided the truth. Silence was not peace, it was control. But Minerva refused to accept it. She began asking questions. Why were people being arrested? Why did no one speak out? Why was fear allowed to rule? What started as curiosity soon became courage. She read banned ideas, spoke openly, and stopped pretending everything was fine. Then came out the moment that changed everything. At the formal gathering, she met Rafael Trujillo himself. Most people would have obeyed, stayed quiet, survived, but Minerva resisted. She refused to flatter him, refused to submit, and in a dictatorship that was dangerous. In that moment, she did not just defy a man, she challenged a system.
These sisters had a close upbringing, so naturally, when Minerva resisted, one by one, her sisters followed. Patria, once deeply religious and quite apathetic towards politics, changed after witnessing violence firsthand. She saw young rebels massacred by Raphael's men, an atrocity that occurred during a religious retreat, which made her question her faith further. Even so, her faith didn't disappear, it just transformed into action. Maria Teresa, the youngest, grew from an innocent observer into an active participant, secretly carrying messages and supporting the movement. Together they became part of an underground resistance group, working to dismantle the dictatorship. They weren't just speaking out anymore. They were organizing, planning, preparing, even branding themselves as La Mariposas, the butterflies. Delicate in name, yet dangerous towards the regime.
The price of defiance. The regime responded the only way it knew, with force. The sisters were watched, followed, then arrested. They were thrown into prison, separated from their families, and subjected to constant pressure. Their homes were raided, their loved ones were targeted. Fear was meant to break them, but it did not. Even behind bars, they refused to stay silent. Their belief was stronger than the punishment. They knew this fight was no longer just theirs, it was for an entire nation living in fear. By 1960, the Mirabal sisters had become symbol of resistance, and that made them dangerous. On November 25th, while returning from visiting their imprisoned husbands, 3 of her sisters were stopped on a lonely road. This was not accident. It was an order carried out under the regime of Rafael Trujillo. They were brutally murdered, but even in that moment, their courage was louder than the fear meant to silence them.
Their deaths were meant to silence a movement. Instead, it ignited one. The country reacted. People who had once been afraid began to speak, to question, to resist. The illusion of control began to crack, and within a year, Raphael's regime collapsed, ending with his assassination in 1961. The sisters sadly never saw it. Only one remained, Didi, who carried their story forward for decades, ensuring they were never forgotten. Today, their legacy lives far beyond their country. The Mirabal sisters didn't just fight a dictator, they challenged fear itself. And even in death, they refused to disappear.